Councillors, we now just perform a short audio and visual check in regards to the live streaming. Checking, testing, 1, 2, 3 for audio. Okay, councillors, being 6 o'clock, I'd like to declare the extraordinary meeting, Blayney Shire Council for August open, and thank you all very much for your attendance. In opening this meeting, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the Wiradjuri people, and pay my respects to elders both past, present and emerging. Councillors and everybody in the chamber, reminder that this meeting is being live streamed and you may be recorded as part of the proceedings here this evening. Councillors, we do have an apology. Councillor Price-Jones is unable to join us here this evening. Could I have a mover that apology is accepted? Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gozowich has seconded that. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declare carried. Mr GM, I'd just like to acknowledge that this evening is the first meeting of our brand new General Manager in Mark Dicker, and welcome Mark, and look forward to working with you into the future. And I'd also like to acknowledge that we have our new Director of Planning, Mr Andrew Muir. Welcome Andrew, lovely to have you here as part of the team this evening as well. Disclosures of interest. And I will note that our Director of Corporate Services also have apology, and you can see Tiffany is in his seat. Disclosures of interest. Mr GM, do we have any disclosures of interest for the business here this evening?
Mr Mayor, I've received no disclosures of interest.
Okay, thank you. No disclosures of interest. Councillors, we do though have a public forum. We have Peter Ogilvie. Thank you and welcome, Peter. Peter is going to speak to us on item 3, DA6 2022, erection of a motel building and business signage, 62 Osmond Street, Blayney. Peter, welcome. If you'd like to step up to the lectern. You have, if you're right, I have approximately 5 minutes and I'll let you know when you're getting close.
I disagree with your conflict of interest there at the moment. I mentioned to you in the first stage that you went around the people. I'll bring up first one as Mr Newstead, for instance. You said you drive the bus for Mr Woodhouse. Mr Woodhouse also uses people, uses the bus to transport the people to and from the mine. And so if you vote for this, you are actually making his position better by actually having more people on his bus. So a conflict of interest, I believe. Again, Mr Young, you work up. Remember we spoke that the ladies from Newcrest came to that meeting, which I think you were there, Mr Reynolds, at that meeting where they got up and they said straight and very clear that Newcrest want this to go ahead and that they were pushing for it. So to me, and the people of Blayney, which if you want to go back through your council booklet you get of what you look like when you do DAs to the people of Blayney, a lot of that was brought up to me, that how can you people vote when you say you're Acadia, you work for a bus company that transports the people backwards and forwards to Acadia, which will actually make more money for the people you work for. And then again, you got that grant from Acadia, just the way it looks, that's all I'm saying. And Mr Dicker, again, he would have knew earlier on that this motel was going, because he was the town planner, it would have came through. It's not illegal what you do. If you're going to buy a building or a structure, you get in contact with the council. The council then, you would have had prior knowledge to this. So my opinion is, and the people of Blayney, which was brought up to me, is that your wife also bought that Iron Bar Cafe, which again, if it passed, the people will drink coffee there, which is, helping the spouse make a
Peter, your comments are noted. Would you like to speak to the item that we're considering here this evening?
That's a part of the item. You said there's no conflict of interest, so I'm just bringing it up, ask the question. So that's fair enough, I believe. So we'll get on to the next thing. Silica dust, as I've brought up, you've got saying that they're not non-hygienic. They're hygienic and they wash out there, but that's apart from... I worked in and out there for 12 years at mine face. The dust and the dirt that blows around out there is unbelievable. Of a night, sometimes nights it look like fog out there, the dust, and it comes back on their clothes. They call it transfer. And the New South Wales Safe Work have got a big X on silica transfer, where it comes on the workers' clothes. They've got to work, they dress, there's no doubt they wash, I'm not saying they don't, but they've still got to walk that 100 odd metres from where they wash to where they get in the vehicles, which the vehicles have been there all day. Anyone who's been out there will know the dust that collects on them vehicles, it goes into the vents, it's on your shoes when you walk in. If it's a muddy day, your boots, your clothes have got the stuff on them. They'll bring it back to here, and what happens? When it dries out, it will blow. And it's going to blow all over the town. Simple as that. The next one is there's the building. What on my, you've said that it doesn't comply at this stage, the buildings. So why don't they comply? That was one of you just put into my response, that said that the buildings do not comply, but they can be made to comply. But how? So I'd like to know, and the people of Blayney would like to know how they can be made to comply if they don't comply at this stage. Tree at the exit. Well, geez, I hope you've gone down to have a look at that. That tree should go, because when you come out of there, even you're blind for a start. The car will be nearly across the footpath before they come out to see the actual pedestrians and kids on scooters, which is a school area. Kids go down there flat out on scooters and things. So when you come out, you cannot see. And that tree, then if you come further out, that tree is then blocking your vision from your left-hand side with the people coming across Walter Street. So it's got to go. Plus that somehow that exit is just not safe. And if you look at the risk management, it's extreme, which means there could be death there, which means there's litigation on the half of the council would be litigated against. So we'll leave that one, so it's something to have a think about. Disabled parking there, I noticed on the plan they've got two little small spaces, but disabled parking is about a 1.5 of what it should be on that little plan. But again, it could come back that it doesn't comply at this stage. It's got to be made to comply. Who's going to certify these structures to be habitable? That, again, no one's told us that. Who is going to certify these things to make them habitable? A very brave person, I think. Asbestos. We were told here, and I think it's a few years were at a meeting when we talked about asbestos, and we were told by the council there was no asbestos on that site as of March last year. But we've got a letter here from Kensington Homes that says it had asbestos in it, and all that stuff, when it was taken out of that thing in March 2021, was taken to the tip and dumped. And as you know, the building was built in late 1950s, which asbestos, the whole place was full of asbestos, let's be honest. And it's gone to the tip, and it's sitting up there, would have been sitting up there as an open exposure at that tip. There was no one, when they disposed of originally in March, there was no one over there that actually had PPE gear. I was there, I heard the noise when they started smashing windows and hauling it out the windows. And no one had PPE gear correct on. A couple of young kids were running the show, and that was it. Plus, there was no fence put up. There should have been a fence put up around it, security fence with the DA on the wall. That was never done until this has just started about 3 months ago. It should have, even under the legislation, it should have had a fence and all the DA around it, as when it was, the ground was bored for the piers to make sure the soil was right. No fence, no nothing. So, again...
Peter, just you've got about approximately a minute or so, if you're getting close.
So we got, it's code of conduct. We talked about that. There's just a few other little simple things. Yep. Site rules. There's none. There's no site rules over there. But I've been over there. Walked past. I don't know how many photos I've got. The other day, a bloke's down a trench, no helmet on, no PPE gear on, and here's the excavator digging a hole. There's dirt and rubbish has come out of that driveway, which this council must have been able to see, and it's come out, which is illegal. Dirt cannot leave the premises on a vehicle. It must be washed off before it leaves the premises. There was no, even at the moment, the sign over there is not compliant. There's no people. I was talking to a young bloke the other day at road, drove his car straight in there to go to there's no one there to sign the people in or sign the people out. So if something happens there, how do you know it's on site? So this council, I think, should be out there and policing this over here, because that's your job. You've got to police it. As simple as that. And at the moment, it's not being done. So I think there's a lot of things. I'm not against it. As I said earlier, as Mr. Ferguson said, I'm not against it, and I don't think anyone in Blayney is against it. But as long as it's done properly, safely, and it doesn't infect the people of Blayney, because this stuff can affect your immune system, autoimmune system, MS, Parkinson's. It can affect the bones. It can affect all your internal body parts, as Mr. Ewan should know because he works at the mine. But I was never told when I worked out of that mine. I worked in there and out there for 12 years, and I was never told about the dangers of that dust. So hopefully they are now saying that. I believe I suppose you can't talk to me, but hopefully they are. Because for the first 12 years they did nothing.
Thank you,
Peter. And that blew all over us.
Thank you, Peter, for your...
And I hope it doesn't blow over Blayney. Thank you from this development.
Thank you, Peter, for your observations and raising those concerns with Council tonight. Okay, councillors, moving on now. We have there's no Merrill Minute, and I'll now refer you to the first item for consideration. I draw your attention to page 5, item 1, the draft statement of financial reports by Council 21-22, recommendations there 1 to 10. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Councillor Newstead has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ewan, thank you, has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to this report? Councillor Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support the recommendation. Just a couple of comments. Firstly, in relation to the Rural Fire Service assets, I support, although I wasn't at the meeting, I support the resolution the Merrill Minute we ratified at the last meeting, continuing our practice of not recording the Rural Fire Service Red Fleet assets in our financial statements. And I do support, I'm very pleased to see that in the note to the accounts C1-7, that we are not only recording the fact that we are not recording those assets, but we are now listing the value of our assets, which would be increased if we were to record them, and the amount of depreciation which would be included in our financial statements if we were to record those assets. So when it comes to full disclosure, it may well be we end up with qualified accounts, but I think anyone interested in this particular topic who is minded to read our accounts and read the note to the accounts will see precisely what financial effect it has on Council's position by not recording those assets. So I'm very pleased to see that that note to the accounts, which is much a fuller explanation than it has appeared in previous years. Second thing I'd like to mention, congratulate Council staff on finding a very small operating surplus. That's good to see. And finally, on the negative side, it's a shame we had to de-restrict some of our reserves in order to end up with a positive unrestricted cash position at the end of the year, a small amount as it is. It's always good to make sure that we do have some unrestricted cash as at balance date, even if we had to de-restrict some of the other internal restrictions. So with those comments, I would support the endorsing of the financial statements and sending them off to the audit.
Thank you, Councillor Somerville, and certainly endorse the fact that Council did resolve, as well as majority of councils in New South Wales, to not recognise those assets on our books. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of comments, and fully support Councillor Somerville's comments when it comes particularly to the Red Fleet and our decision of the previous councillor and also Red Fleet. A couple of things that I don't know if I lose sleep overnight about them, but I do think about things, particularly our cash position, and it does worry me moving forward, and where we are at the moment, we're spending all of our depreciation and potentially a little bit more. Some of it's going to pay off loans, etc. So, you know, there are positives there, but as in where we're heading from a cash position point of view, and I know we're undertaking a review at the moment, and hopefully in the next month or two we will come back, but we either have to start making a decision to either borrow more money or change is in our mix of how we fund things moving forward, because again, with the level of unrestricted assets, and we've had to, as it says in the notes, unrestrict some restricted assets that are on our books. I'd rather see us actually have some cash on our books, as in that's unrestricted, and work out a figure. But once we've done this review, then we might be able to sort of come up with an arbitrary figure. And again, it's always important to remember that this is a moment in time. So on the 30th of June, this is where we stood. As in a month later, so the end of July, we may be in a totally different position, but as in when you have a June 30 deadline, or as in annual return or reports, as in that's the moment in time you have to take. And the other one that does concern me a little bit is the wage overrun, again on budget, that are around about $450,000 higher, and it's the second year in a row that we've overrun wages on budget. I know there are a number of factors on why we've overrun with regard to wages, but it is something that we can't continue as a council to overrun our wage budget. Otherwise, that cash component, as in it shrinks by the amount that we've overrun. So something again to have a look at with regard to our wages and our budget for the next financial year, because I'd hate to see 3 years in a row a fairly substantial overrun on the wage component. But overall, as in to have a $68,000 surplus is a fantastic outcome. A lot of councils would be very happy with that, because I suspect a lot of councils throughout New South Wales are going to have substantial deficits. So, yeah, as in well done to the staff, and let's hope once the auditor has been through that small surplus is maintained. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any other further questions or Excuse me, members of the community there, it's quite disruptive you chatting while we're trying to have this meeting. If you'd like to talk, please leave the chamber and then come back in. Thank you very much. Councillors, we're still considering this item in front of us. Any other questions or comments? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, now moving through to page 15, item 2, DA 58-2022, change of use, resource recovery facility to Tolbar Street, Blayney. Recommendation there, councillors. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Thank you. Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Somervale has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to this item? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is fantastic. There are a few potential challenges, but I think the proponent has answered the concerns, and a great opportunity to move forward both in the recycling of some building materials as well as the vermiculture, the worm castings. I think is fantastic opportunity, and maybe a small new business for our shire, hopefully using some of the materials that are cast from our community and recycled to produce a valuable fertiliser, which I believe is quite expensive to buy. So an exciting opportunity for a business in Blayney Shire to actually develop this fertiliser side. So fully support the recommendation with the concerns of a neighbour answered in the report. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Yes, the concerns that were raised by the public submissions, I think, can be confidently addressed in the conditions of consent. Councillors, any other questions or comments in regards to this item? Councillor Newstead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just through you to the Acting Director. So this new facility won't have any effect on Blayney Foods getting their food licence through and everything? It's pretty clear?
Mr. Director.
That is certainly our assessment. Okay. That is certainly our assessment. There's probably a couple of issues probably just to touch on. Firstly, the development itself. Being in an industrial zone amongst other activities which are industrial zones. So that is probably the first aspect. And the development itself, in terms of the operation of it, has been assessed to have a minimal impact. If it was to have an impact, for example, in terms of odour, we have a condition of consent which would require operations to cease until that's addressed, if that was to occur. In terms of the food licence of the actual premises in the nearby vicinity, we believe through our investigations and also discussions with the Food Authority that the food licence, which requires a program to be put in place, specifically relates to the processes and the activities on that site, and any externalities should not impact upon that. So that was conducted for our research, and that's what we believe to be the case. That's correct.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Thank you, Councillor Newstead. Councillors, any other questions? Councillor Somervale.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I support the approval of this development. It's a good development for the Shire, and I welcome it. And the one thing I would like to say is I was impressed with the analysis that's been produced for councillors in relation to what could have been a difficult matter, particularly with the technicalities of what's designated development and what's not, and what's integrated development and what's not. And I think the analysis certainly satisfies me that we don't have any particular issues on those two fronts. So I'm very happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Somervale. Councillors, any other further questions or comments? We have a mover, we have a seconder. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. I call for a motion for a division. Let the minutes show that it was a unanimous decision. Okay, councillors, moving through the next item, page 41, item 3, DA6 2022, erection of a motel, building and business signage, 62 Osmond Street, Blayney. This is the subject of our public forum earlier this evening. There's a recommendation there. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Thank you. Councillor Newstead has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Seconder, Councillor Somervale has seconded that. Councillors, questions or comments in regards to this item? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions were brought up in the public forum tonight. So I'd just like some clarity with regard to, and it's not this DA, but the accompanying DA next door. Does council actually have any role in inspecting with the demolition, the construction, etc., and what comes off the site? Is my first question to the director or the general manager.
Okay. There you go.
Mr. Director.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, there are a number of items raised, of course. One of them was in relation to potential silica dust being brought to the site from another site. I suppose the simple answer to that is the council's assessing this development application on its merits, and no, the council wouldn't have a role there. In relation to some of the other items mentioned, there were certainly, from what I gather, I've taken some notes, and there might be some things which we can take on notice in terms of what might be happening on site in relation to any existing approvals or what might be exempt there at the moment. That's something we can certainly take on notice and have a look at. Some of the matters which were raised seem to me to be possibly related to safe work in terms of on-site workplace activities. I got that impression. I note there was a discussion about asbestos, and councillors might note at condition 24 there's a condition regarding natural. And I'm not quite sure if that covers all those issues. Mr. General Manager might be able to add something.
Thank you, Mr. Director.
Councillor Reynolds, yes, we do have a role in compliance with the existing conditions of consent, but it's paramount that they're actually raised directly to us when they're occurring. Down the track is no good. So there are a number of, I think it was well in excess of 100 conditions off memory on that original approval, and we've had no other correspondence in terms of non-compliances on that site, to be quite honest. There's been correspondence from the applicant on a number of matters. We've approved a 510 exemption to renovate the exterior of the old former bowling club site, and another 510 to take some trees out which were dead and dangerous. So the key message would be, if something is seen that is a non-compliance, that it's reported to us so we can investigate it.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. Councillor Reynolds.
There's a couple of questions and maybe a comment with regard to the new motel as opposed to the existing DA for the demolition and construction of Part A, I suppose you could say. With regard to the motel, is there actually, and I've tried to have a look at the plans and understand, is there a separate reception for this second stage, or is it all part of the one complex with the existing clubhouse, or the bowling clubhouse? So that's probably my next question, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Reynolds. So it's one central office is the proposal. So the original office, which was approved in the first stage development, will also be the office for this motel. I believe that's my understanding. Yes.
So a follow on then, Mr. Mayor, with regard to that, as in access to that office, as in I assume you can't motor vehicle wise access it. So is there walking paths to get to that office from this motel site and signage, etc.? Is that part of this DA on how to get from point A to point B? As in I've had a look at the design, but I wasn't sort of able to ascertain as a customer how that actually know where the office is or facility is to actually book in.
Okay, Councillor Reynolds. Mr. Director, there's a question.
Well, it's a very good question. Probably the plans probably don't go to that level of detail. As a comment, I think internal pedestrian traffic and leading patrons to the site where they'll be staying really is a matter that the proprietor should have a major interest in, of course. So one would expect that that will be incorporated as part of the internal signage and mobility.
And that's fine to me, as in I stayed in a large motel in Dubbo last Monday night, and it had across streets and everything, so as in you had to go to one central reception, but then you had to drive to a different block, etc. So there's, as in it is understandable. With regard to one concern that was brought up in the public forum, coming back out onto the footpath, so exiting this new section of the motel, is it possible, and I believe council did condition that a stop sign be put on exiting coming out here into Church Street, but a stop sign actually be inserted at before the footpath and a white line across, so particularly as it's so close to the high school, just for vehicles to actually stop and look for pedestrian traffic before they move out onto the road.
I think it actually says
it is.
on the
Okay,
report
sorry.
that there'll be a traffic calming device and a stop sign there as well.
Sorry about that. And a final question, and it was partially answered, I think, with regard to the existing clubhouse. So is it supposed to be completed and totally upgraded by the time this motel is finished, or the first part of the motel, or was that? I think that was a separate DA.
Yeah,
but
I think they're separate.
So, is there a plan to have that total building completed at the first part of the motel development?
I'm not sure what the staging is of it, councillor, but I would imagine they're separate, not actually related. Mr. Director, comment on?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I'd probably have to take that one on notice unless Mr. General Manager knows anything about the combination of the two.
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Reynolds. So the first DA, my understanding is the office would be completed before any association with this DA, but there's actually another development application that has been lodged, which we're waiting on some further information specifically to the old bowling club building itself and its use. So we'll commence assessment once we have that information and start that process.
Thank you. That probably answers. I was a bit confused. I thought we'd passed something, but we haven't yet. So that's another DA that will potentially come.
Through Mr. Mayor, the only part of the building that's used in stage one is that office downstairs area that was specifically part of that first stage. The remainder of the building will be subject to another DA, which assessment will commence shortly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any further questions or comments?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just a comment, I guess, on previously spoken in regard to the access and regress from the actual motel site, and it was, and it says in the conditions of consent that there would be a stop sign on the regress, and obviously traffic calming devices are probably also on the egress and the access, which is wonderful because it then says that the heritage tree down on the southern corner will be able to remain there, and it's suggested that with those conditions and consent, the control for pedestrian traffic will alleviate any potential issues. So that's good to see. I think, yeah, if you wish to comment, you can, but I think that's a great step forward as far as conditions of consent to the developer.
Thank you, Councillor Ewan. Councillors, Councillor Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got just one issue that I just want to drill down a bit into. But first of all, just to clarify, the report says that there's a whole lot of lots in this DA, 7 or 8 or something, and the proposal is to consolidate all of those into one lot. What I wanted to get clear is whether that is just one lot for this particular motel development, or are we talking about one lot for this as well as the existing DA that was approved last year? I'll explain why I'm interested if it's not, the answer to that's not clear.
Through Mr Mayor, I'm quite confident that they are consolidating the entire allotment. So the subdivision in stage 1 was actually, that application was modified and approved under delegation to remove that component. So my understanding it is they're consolidating the entire allotment.
If that's the case, then I'm not particularly concerned. But I'll just explain in case that doesn't turn out to be right. As I read this, I assumed that all the lots associated with this particular development were consolidated into one lot, and the existing approved DA was another lot, or lots. And the thing that concerned me was location of the storage and collection of waste, where it's been agreed that that will now be located in the same spot as the existing DA. And the thing that troubled me about that was that if the two developments were in separate titles, even though it's the same applicant, same proprietor at this stage, if at some stage the two developments were separately sold off, then the ability to keep the storage and collection of waste arising from this particular development on the land subject to the earlier development may be lost. In other words, whilst it's all in the same ownership, that's fine, but if the ownerships were to be separated, then the ability to keep the waste on the other lot wouldn't continue. And we'd need to deal, if it's important for this particular DA to make sure the waste is kept in the same spot as the other DA, then we'd need to condition that in some way. But if the answer is the whole site is going to be one lot, both the existing DA and the one we're talking about now, well then that problem goes away.
Right. There's a question. Mr. Just checking, Councillor Somerville.
Mr Mayor, I'm quite confident it's condition 53 on page 311 that requires all lots to be consolidated into one lot.
Both DAs, the land's subject to both DAs.
That's my understanding, yes.
Yep. Okay, that's good, thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Somerville. Councillors, any other further questions or comments regards to this item? I'd just like to note the concerns that were raised by the public forum, and Council will certainly take on board those issues that have been raised by Peter. And I'd also like to say that in regards to this motel itself, as a separate DA, I think it will be a real value add to the community. Certainly this type of accommodation is much sought after, and I think it would be a real good asset in the years to come for the community. Councillors, no other questions or comments regarding this item. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. And I call for a division. Let the minutes show that the decision was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. Okay, councillors, we do have a couple of matters to be considered in closed committee. So in accordance with the Local Government Act 93 and the Local Government Regulation 2005, in the opinion of the General Manager, the following business is of a kind as referred to in section 10.2a, 10.2 of the Act, and should be dealt with in part of the meeting closed to the media and public. Item 4, Contract 062022, Traffic Management Services. And item 5, Request for Variation, Waste Collection and Processing. Can we have a mover? Thank you. Can we have a mover that we go into closed committee? Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Goswich, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declared carried. Councillors will now go into closed committee. Okay, thank you, councillors. We are now back into open council and live streaming. The results of the two items that were considered in closed committee. Item 4, Contract 6/2022 Traffic Management Services. The recommendations that were passed was 1, that council accept the tender from Midwest Traffic Management Proprietary Limited for the quality assured schedule of rates contract for the provision of traffic management services number 6/2022. 2, delegate authority to the General Manager to execute the contract deed of agreement between Blayney Shire Council and Midwest Traffic Management Proprietary Limited. 3, delegate authority to the General Manager to extend the term of the contract for a further 2 terms of 12 months each if contractor performance and price are acceptable. Councillors, we also considered item 5, request for variation, waste collection and processing, which was approved. The recommendation is that council delegate authority to the Mayor and General Manager to approve by application of the council seal the continuation of the variation of the existing domestic waste and recycling contract between Blayney Shire Council and JR and EG Richards Proprietary Limited for council to forego any refund sharing agreement in respect of the container deposit scheme. Councillors, that concludes our business here this evening. I thank you all for your attendance. I officially declare the meeting closed.